Well, welcome everybody. I don't know if I need to use the mic, but I'll keep it close to me. I'm representing Joe Sosnowski. I wanted to welcome you to the forum. We have at least one of our speakers is getting close to the parking lot, so I didn't want to wait too much longer to get it started. And then the third one is missing in action, but we're sure he'll be here soon. But we wanted to go ahead and get started with the presentation for those of you who are on schedule. And we were planning to keep this just a pretty short 1 hour. And it's really a great opportunity to talk about school choice. And as many of you know, this is National School Choice Week. And so the information that will be discussed today is a little bit about policy, what's happening out there, not just in Illinois, but around the country on this issue that's so important. And one of the reasons I got involved with the school choice movement is not just, on the professional side, I obviously work with private school, Rockford Christian here. But for many years, I've always been very interested in this movement that we've seen a lot of progress in a lot of other states outside of Illinois toward school choice. And school choice covers a lot of different areas, whether it's charter schools, opportunity for tuition scholarships, tax credits, or vouchers to private schools, students with special needs, both physical and mental, to get into different types of schooling that otherwise families or government support would not be able to afford. And so there's the opportunity for families to be able to really work and determine and choose which schooling works best for their family and for their individual student. I think is very important and very fundamental. And again, as I mentioned, we've seen many states for decades have policies that allow families to use credits to go to either parochial or non-religious schools, non-denominational, opportunities to go to charter schools. And one of the things we've had here in Illinois, fortunately, is the charter school movement. Probably stronger in and around the Chicagoland area, but we've had successful charters here in Rockford. And we see by the numbers of families looking to enroll or that are on waiting lists across the nation, there's obviously a lot of families that agree and are very much interested in having that choice. So we put together this forum to celebrate that, to talk a little bit. The panelists who will speak today will talk about their areas of expertise, talk about the issue in general. We can get into some specifics. We're also going to have opportunities for questions. So I'm going to talk very little after the opening here. But if you have questions about anything that the speakers talk about today, just write them down on a card. I'll grab those from you. We'll ask a couple questions to get things going. So we kind of want to make this an interactive panel discussion to be able to share information about the different things that are happening around the nation and in the state of Illinois. A couple of quick notes I just wanted to mention in regards to that. A lot of folks, when we talk about school choice, there obviously can be political dynamics to that and getting it passed, and that's one of the issues I think we've had in Illinois for so long. But interestingly enough, if you look at polling, what do families and parents think? In many cases, 60 to 70% is what you'll see from African American families, Hispanic families, white families, whether or not they support school choice. And so if you look around, though, we don't have 70% of our families eligible for choice in one form or fashion. And that's, I think, a testament, unfortunately, to the struggle between public sector unions and maybe some of the uncertainty of what school choice really means to families. And one thing we see is I think it's a process improvement. It improves education for everybody when families are able to choose. Interestingly enough, I think the movement towards choice in education is growing. If you look at millennials, polling there, 75% of them now support forms of school choice. So, as the younger generation continues to get older, we're seeing that public support for more opportunities grow. So we're really excited, again, to start this out today. We've got three panelists that were scheduled to be here. So Bruno Behrend is panelist number one. He's a senior fellow at the Heartland Institute. Michael Chartier is probably in the parking lot as we're speaking. He's the senior director of state relations for Ed Choice. And he'll talk about what his organization does also. And then Miles Mendoza is the executive director for Empower Illinois. And if for some reason we don't see Miles in a little bit here, I can fill in for him a little bit. I don't work with Empower, but Empower was the organization that kind of springboarded from the recent state of Illinois scholarship tax credit. And they're the organization that will be working throughout the state of Illinois to collect resources, work with tax credits, and also take applications for scholarships. And they'll be the ones that are kind of the clearinghouse for all that. There are some other organizations, but they're right now the predominant one that will be operating in Illinois. But without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Bruno. If you want to talk about yourself, give a little bit of a bio, a little bit about your organization, what you do, and then maybe if you want to go into some of the opportunities or issues that you've worked on personally or in the organization. Please share. Thank you so much for being here.
You know what, I'll just pop up there. So that mic is already on. I'll be standing up so I can, sounds good. How is everybody today? What's really funny about this, and you may or may not know this, probably not very familiar with it, but usually I'm the guy that's late. And I'm the one coming in here and sitting down while everybody else is in the middle of things. So it's very interesting to be on the other, I guess what's that line from Airplane? The hand is on the other foot now. Anyway. I just recently gave a speech to a group of folks in Wisconsin, and on education. And education has been one of the things that I've thought about for most of my life. I like to tease people when they say, "Well, what are your credentials in education?" I say, "Well, I was 5 years old. I was sitting out at the dinner table, and my dad was railing about American schools. He was a post-war German immigrant." And in particular, he was railing about something he didn't like about my sister's teacher, my sister was 3 years older than I was. I was just starting kindergarten in first grade, and she was in third or fourth grade. And I'm sitting there as a little kid at the table, and I'm hearing my dad rail about the teacher, rail about the school system, and what he doesn't like about it. And I said, "Well, Dad, what's wrong with the public schools?" And he said, "John Dewey." Now, that might not be funny, but it's kind of funny if you know anything about John Dewey who John Dewey is. He's probably the person in the last 50 years who had the most impact on structuring the way kids learn in schools today. And you can agree or disagree with him. He was a very smart man. He knew a thing or two about stuff. But his philosophy, even though he may not have said this exact quote, but the Deweyites were the people who said, "We don't teach reading, writing, and arithmetic. We teach Johnny." Now, I would propose to you that that's not really a very good way to set up an education system. But I can also say that at age 4, I already had a pretty good idea about what was wrong with schools, even if I had no idea what that meant. So those are my credentials. I work with the Heartland Institute. The Heartland Institute is a free market think tank that was founded in 1984, and its mission is to discover, develop, and promote new ideas to empower develop and implement new ideas to empower American citizens. Transforming education is probably the one thing that might most transform America or reset its direction into what we would probably think would be a better direction. Right direction, wrong direction question, show of hands. Right direction, wrong direction, America right now. Don't everybody, so wrong direction. I asked that question clearly. Right direction. A couple of people. Okay. It's a good debate, and my view always has been that regarding education, you have to look at what works and what doesn't work. But I've always questioned the one-size-fits-all district-based school system. If like a certain number of people were put into suspended animation and sent off, thousands of people, or 2,000 or 10,000 people, 100,000, off into space to start up a new colony somewhere on some different planet, they would not get off the spaceship and invent this system. It's too expensive. It doesn't educate people well enough for the expense that we're putting forward. And at this moment in time, there are so many new options that are coming online in ways to educate that we should be having many more schools like this one whose building we're in right now, and many more ways to educate than we should in continuously thinking that we have to do something to save or preserve how many people are Lord of the Rings fans? A brick and mortar school system, because we don't need it. And that's not to say that it will go away. That's not to say that it should disappear or we should just, rip it all down and start new. But one of the things that starts happening as you develop a giant bureaucracy and a giant system with its own inertia is that nobody really ever comes in and thinks about how, about ways to fix things. Instead, they always do what, kind of what happened with Obamacare. Whether you like the system prior to Obamacare, whether you like Obamacare, one of the problems with Obamacare was that they had to do another layer of really kludgy, that's a tech term, reforms to a system that was already a massive kludge. And I would suggest to you that the current education system that we have is a massive kludge, a kludgeocracy. And every time somebody wants to do something new or interesting, it has to be run through the same 5 or 6 interest groups that have the say, yes or no, on whether or not that system, whether or not that change can be implemented. And many of the good ideas get lost to the wayside, or they'll say, yes, we'll try and paste, oh, look, here's a new idea. We'll try and paste it right here on this kludge that we've developed over the last 70 years. And I'm one of the people that thinks that's a mistake. The speech that I gave in Wisconsin last week to a group up there, it was titled, "Is America a Public School Country?" And the genesis of that was that I was helping a couple of young ladies trying to get a charter school started in Chicago. And they were working with the Hillsdale College charter school network. And I got some training in a really interesting charter school option called classical education, which, if you don't know about a classical education, it's essentially the kind of schools that we might have had here in the 60s, public schools. But for the most part, it's kind of like that prep school education. You start very early, learning very, very strong verbal and speaking and reading and writing communication skills. So you learn the language first, which puts you in a position to understand more of what you're hearing later, and then everything after that is sequenced in a very, very content-rich way so that you learn a lot quickly. And this network, this charter school, they already have 16 of these up and running. That's just one option. And that's a charter school. Then there's this school, there's many private schools, there's all kinds of options. But the interesting thing is that I took a stat about how good the schools were in the 50s and 60s and the way they are now. They've dropped dramatically during the 80s and 90s in quality and test scores. They dumped down the test scores a lot. And then with all the push on education reform, they've essentially been flatlined since then, but they're not dropping or collapsing the way they have since the 60s. So where I'm coming from on this is that, yes, America is a public school country. As the representative said, we get these polls about school choice, and it's very popular. Whether it's people, they like the idea of charter schools sound like a good idea. A bunch of different schools where money follows the child, that sounds like a good idea. But then the minute you try to get those things passed into legislation, the 5 or 6 interest groups that like the way things are, that are spending the money the way they are, that are hiring, 20, 30, 40, 50% more administrators and deck chair rearrangers and chief bottle washers and that kind of stuff, those are the people that are very unhappy with new ideas. And they stop all that reform in its tracks. So I've been one of the people in the school reform or education transformation movement that has been telling people, stop trying to fix the public schools. It's not the best place to put your efforts. And I am a big fan of charter school expansion legislation. I'm a big fan of education savings accounts. Miles did a lot of work to get the scholarship program put in place, and that's a good idea. And what I've come to the conclusion, and the representative just alluded to this, if you really want to help the public schools get better, faster, because they're going to be with us no matter what, dramatically, absolutely dramatically expand education choice as fast as you can. Because as people have extra choices, the schools will then be forced to say, why are people leaving? What's happening? we had all these kids and now the kids are all going over here. And the reaction will be, we better figure out what's going on, and they will improve. And where you've seen expansion of choice, you've actually seen that happen. Whether it's the history of the very first voucher program in Milwaukee, where the local public schools got better very quickly, and then you have the situation where charters under Mayor Daley expanded rapidly in Chicago. And they expanded so rapidly that the Chicago Public School District actually got on the stick. They're still very, very good at wasting money, as most school districts are. But they, at the same time, did improve. There's no doubt about that. So that's my take on this. And then the last thing I'd like to say is that for all of you who think about this, and you do think about this because you're here, right? I'm going to ask that you stop thinking in terms of saying we have to save X, or we have to do this, or we have to do that, and start thinking in terms of what is the best way to get the best education for all these American children as fast as possible, for the least, not the most, but the least amount of money. Because we spend more in this country than, you can pick a city or a city-state that might spend more than we do at one time or another, but we spend more than all of our OECD competitive nations by a long shot. I think the next lowest is, we're up at $11,000 to $12,000 per child per year right now. The next lowest is like at $8,000 or $8,500, $9,000 per year. That's a pretty large number. And they're all generally, most of them, outperforming us. So that's the way to think about this. And during Q&A, if you want to ask me questions about, I'm big on school choice. I'm big on legislation that brings us school choice. But what I'm bigger on, what I really want, what I'd love to see, is to do to the public schools what Priceline did to travel agents, and what Uber had the impact of doing to cab cartels. Because we need to start thinking about the people who need to be educated, and we have to stop thinking about the 5 or 3 big triangle of interest groups who are holding all education change hostage right now. And if you have any questions about how to do that or what might be a disruptive technology, I'm more than happy to answer that in Q&A. Thank you very much. All right, I think I saw him come in. This time we're going to have Michael Chartier. If you want to come up, you can use the podium or feel free to just jump in at the table here. But we want to just introduce you, have you talk a little bit about yourself, your bio, your background. You don't have to read your entire resume, but feel free if that's your interest. And just, you could talk maybe a little bit about some of the policy and the work that you've been working on with your organization personally. We definitely appreciate that.
Sure. I'll make this really quick for you guys, because I know that Q&A is probably the most important thing in getting your guys' question answered. But I'm the Senior Director of State Relations for EdChoice. We are a national nonprofit that's dedicated to educating citizens and citizens in the community at large about educational choice. We were originally the Friedman Foundation for Educational Choice, founded by Milton Friedman, the Nobel economist, in 1996. And we changed our name this last year in accordance with his wishes about what he wanted to do with the foundation moving forward. So we've been in existence since that time, and we've had a hand in most, if not almost all, of the school choice programs that have passed in one way or another. So my background really is I worked actually for the governor of the neighboring state, Mitch Daniels, in Indiana. At that time, what got me into this is that we passed, at that time, the largest school choice program in the country, largest voucher program in the country, with basically about 67% of the kids in the state of Indiana eligible to receive a voucher to go to school of their choice. As part of that, I worked on that initiative and helped the governor pass that. And afterwards, I kind of fell in love with the issue and moved over to work at the Friedman Foundation and EdChoice. I think to kind of give you guys a quick update about what's going around the country, we've had explosive growth in the passage of private school choice programs across this country. Right now, there are 62 programs in 29 states in the District of Columbia. That there was actually one more in Colorado, but that was repealed by a school board that kind of turned their backs on 300 kids that signed up for a bachelor program there. We're at 62 in 29 states and DC. So Illinois is right there with most of the states out there across the country. I think one of the things that I would talk about for you guys to think about when kind of ask us questions is what more can be done in your state. One of the states that I worked on most closely was the Nevada ESA, the Nevada Education Savings Account Program. That took a lot of my time to help get that bill passed in 2015, and that currently is the largest school choice program in the country in terms of eligibility. 96% of all kids in the state of Nevada are eligible to receive about $5,700 or $5,100, depending on family income, to spend on the educational services of their choice. So I think one of the things that I would ask you guys is to continue to go down this path, exploring private school choice and all forms of school choice is what more can be done.
And I'll just do a quick additional bio on Miles Mendoza, who I'll apologize on his behalf, but with Empower Illinois, with the recent scholarship tax credit program that was passed here in the state, their organization helped with the lobbying effort under a different name that he transitioned to start working with Empower as the scholarship granting organization. But one of the interesting things about that program in Illinois is everybody pretty much had written him off, and everybody that supported any opportunity for school choice in Illinois, saying there is no way in blue state Illinois will we ever get this passed. But thanks to the governor, the work within the legislature on both sides of the aisle, when I get back to those polling numbers I mentioned, that somewhere between 60 and 70% sometimes, even though a lot of legislators may not necessarily vote for it personally, many of them send students of their own to charters and private schools, and they are very much interested in school choice. And there's conflicting interests politically with unions and schools sometimes, but many of them even support it. Again, it crosses bipartisan across the aisle. And so Miles' work on that, along with his organization in bringing this to fruition, has been vitally important. As Empower, they'll be working again with many of the local schools here in our area, and then about 80% of the schools around the state in regards to giving out and processing the scholarship tax credit. There's several friends of ours from a variety of different schools here. I know that they'll be available for questions and answers also, and I can kind of lead that up to question and answer too. We can talk a little bit more about the program that's going to be launched here, or that is launching in the state of Illinois here. And that will actually start January 31st, where families will be able to start applying online at Empower Illinois on their website. So we can get into that a little bit more, but while our two speakers are here, I had just one or two questions to kind of start us off on a little bit of a panel discussion. And then if you have a question, if you want to write it down on your card, or if you're comfortable just announcing it, I'll pause after their answer to the next question. We can just kind of open it up to the group here and see what types of questions are out there. I guess kind of a simple question, and hopefully you can elaborate on it in your experience. I mean, what has been your personal interaction with parents, and maybe some personal stories that you've seen and how they feel about choice, how it's affected them individually, and just kind of what families and parents feel about that and what we've seen around the state or around the nation? Either one you can start.
So I'll tell you two stories. One of them is personal, and one is parents that I met in the state of Arizona. The personal story is actually about my cousin, David. He was diagnosed with dyslexia probably, I think at this point, about 12 years ago. And his parents had sent him to a Catholic school before that. And he wasn't doing very well in that Catholic school. And he ended up going to a Jewish day school for 2 summers. They had a program there that helped him deal with his dyslexia. And he ended up going after that to the public school where they had the specific services there to help him deal with his dyslexia. He's now attending college at Manchester University in in Indiana. The reason I want to tell that story is that there's a lot of times people view school choice as about people moving from public to private school or public to a charter school or something like that. And I think it's really more than that. It's about finding the right fit. We often talk about competition in education, and I think there's something to be said for that. But really what I think school choice is, it's about matching. It's about matching the student's individual needs with a learning provider that's best able to suit those needs. So I think that sometimes we get a little ahead of ourselves when we talk about the right kind of choice. I think we should be talking about the best kinds of choice for each individual student. And the other story I'll tell, which I think is probably a little bit more poignant, is there's a father in Arizona that child received an education savings account, and she was extremely intelligent, scored nearly perfect on the SAT later on in her time, so extremely bright kid. But she had severe anxiety issues. She was on the autism spectrum. And her father wanted her to be educated at home with the public school curriculum because he didn't have the skills to help essentially educate her at home as the primary teacher. So he wanted to use the public school curriculum. And the school district, which was a school district right outside of Phoenix, in Chandler, Arizona, didn't have a curriculum, a college level curriculum for children that were learning at home. So essentially what they said to him is, I'm sorry, we can't help you. And he had no other options really other than to try to find a different school district. Ended up applying for an education savings account and hiring a variety of tutors to help get his daughter through all of her coursework, and she took the SAT, and she's now going to Arizona State University on it's almost a full ride scholarship, and she's excelling there. And what I kind of felt bad about when this guy told the story was essentially the school district that was supposed to help educate his child was unwilling to do that. Wasn't able to help work with him, and he had to find another option, another venue for that. And it touched my heart to hear that he had no other options but for this ESA to help him get his daughter where he needed to go. And that sort of always stuck with me.
I don't really have any specific, war stories, regarding people leaving. I perhaps could talk about my own son, who, it was a split family relationship situation, and I had wanted to pay for public or private school, wasn't able to, didn't have the capacity to homeschool him, and his mom wouldn't have let me even if I did have the capacity at the time. But you hear stories, I think everyone here knows of some story of something, either of someone who was benefited by going to a school that better fit their needs. And at the same time, you have also heard all kinds of stories about things in the public schools. Michael's, the last one, speaks exactly to that. One of the big problems with the district system and how expensive and wasteful it's become is based upon the fact that they try to be all things to all people. We're the only, they say we're the only people who have to educate everybody. Well, that's a nice factoid, but it's not necessarily 100% true, as you just heard here. But the other thing is, why would you want to have this? Let's invent a store that does everything Walmart does, everything Target does, everything Myers does, everything Sam's does, everything Costco does, everything. On what planet would you have a business that did everything all the time? You wouldn't. So you don't need to have a set of schools that a district that has to meet all needs all the time. You may or may not be aware that all over Illinois there are school districts. I think the worst example of this is one that's paying $80,000 a year to send a special ed student to a very special school in the mountains in Utah or somewhere. The facts are mostly correct. I don't know. I'd have to make a phone call to find out exactly what that is. But you know, you have the quote-unquote right to be educated, and if they can't educate you properly, you can get a lawyer and you can sue the district, and the district then has to start paying. And it's a very, very expensive proposition, where one of the things that EdChoice has done, in once I think it's Oklahoma or Nebraska, is that they created a special education voucher scholarship. And you have a special education child, he's assessed, and you get up to $20,000 to send your child to the school that works best for them. If that's what we do for the gifted, and if that's what we do for the special education that it needs, special needs children, why should the quote-unquote regular kid or the normal kid not have the same option to get the education that's best for them instead of trying to put them into a one-size-fits-all factory model?
Thank you very much. I don't want to put you on the spot here. Again, if you've got any questions, pass them in, or I'll ask you to raise your hand and you can shout it out afterwards. Neely isn't back here. She'll wander around on that aisle, and I'll come up this aisle. If you've got a question on a card, I can grab that. Well, I'll ask one other question before we turn it over to the audience. And I don't want to put anybody on the spot here, but you can talk in generalities. I'd like to dive into a little bit maybe a little bit about the federal tax law changes with 529. If you've got some information you want to share, what does that mean to the overall choice discussion? Maybe touch on education savings accounts just a little bit about how they work. And then if you want to comment on the state program, how that tax credit system works rather than me discussing that, I'd love for you to touch on any one of those points. Or if there's other options or things that are being worked on or legislation that's being proposed either federally or in other states.
I haven't immersed myself in the white paper on that issue yet, but to the best of my understanding, so 529s, that you could put money into a savings vehicle for college tuition. And the recent tax law changed that where you can start doing that for elementary school as well. Anything that allows money to be set aside to expand your child's or grandchild's or any child's education choice is probably a good thing. So a tax credit like expanding that is a good idea. From the federal government standpoint, essentially there's this big pile of money, and a chunk of it goes to a bunch of education-style research. Another chunk of it goes to school lunch programs, and most federal money flows to the larger districts with the heavier needs of disadvantaged children in more dense urban areas. Quite frankly, one of the best options the federal government could do is just to skip over the process of writing checks to school districts, and just every time a child is attending a substandard school as measured objectively through some kind of state grading or federal grading system, using the state's grading system might be best. The easiest thing to do there is just to skip right over the school district and either A, send the money directly to that kid's school and let the principal do something with it, but even better, send it directly to the child's family so that they have at least an incentive. They might, like a federal voucher or a federal parent trigger where the money just jumped over the district and the school and went to the kid. Something like that would be, you'd be thinking, well, it's only $2,500, only $3,000, that's enough. That's not enough for tuition. Well, A, that disruptive force that we might start seeing might make it within striking distance of a tuition. But B, if you're a parent who's struggling with your kid's school district and providing your kid with a good education, $2,000 or $3,000 can either get tutoring or they'll scrape together enough money to send them to another school. So anything like that at the federal level is a good thing. And I don't know specifically if Illinois, what it is doing, but my understanding is that the new scholarship legislation is independent of any kind of 529 rules at this point.
Sure, and I'm happy to talk about the education savings accounts. It's kind of something I've worked on for a long time. And what an ESA is it's a parentally controlled account that's funded by state taxes. So the state of Illinois, well, I can use Nevada, but because it's the one I work most closely on, but the state of Illinois would set aside a sum of money for a child to, into a separate account. In the case of Nevada, it's controlled by the treasurer's office. So the treasurer's office oversees that account. The parent gets access to an online portal, and where they can check their balance and look at how much funding there is and the account and all those sorts of things. And from there, what parents can do is they can direct those funds to a wide variety of educational providers and for educational expenses. So they can spend things on private school tuition, textbooks, online classes from an online provider, and especially support therapies, for example. So there's a famous story out of Arizona of a child receiving equine therapy horseback riding to help with balance because he has severe needs in that area. And what those providers would do is they would send an invoice to the treasurer's office. The treasurer's office would approve it, make sure, hey, yes, you're on the list of people that are allowed to invoice us for educational expenses, and then go to the parent and say, yes, is this money, is this actual service provided to your child? They would say yes, and the money would flow out, and they'd actually have a Yelp-style rating system to say, yes, this provider did a good job, and I liked them, or no, they didn't, and I would go there, and those sorts of things. So we can have an additional form of accountability on providers and people that educate children. And what I think is kind of unique about that is that you can really get down and start to tailor your educational experience for kids. So you can actually take classes at the local public school if you wanted to. So in Nevada, you could take up to 3 classes at the local public school. But you can also go elsewhere. You could receive tutoring in, say, chemistry or mathematics. Or you could get, you could do Mandarin Chinese with an individual that lived abroad, as long as they were approved by the treasurer's office. So it really provides the most intimate level of customization, I think, that's out there for an education system.
One other thing wasn't mentioned was virtual schools. I might be able to mention that in the opportunity for choice, virtual schools, online learning provided by universities, secondary institutions, or virtual schools that are just virtual schools providing education. So those are other opportunities that are out there in the world of choice. And I'll just touch base on the state program with the tax credit, how it worked in Illinois and what's available now, or applications for families and students will be available January 31st, but for those who are interested in donating to a program like that, so if it's Boylan or Christian Life or Lutheran or Rockford Christian, if there were families or benefactors that were interested in donating to that school, and maybe they do that already, they are able to now ask for a tax credit, which is equal to 75% of what their tax liability is at the state level. So it's much more beneficial than making a traditional federal donation. And so there's obviously the tax benefit, and they would make that donation. It goes to a not-for-profit, Empower, in one particular case, then would distribute those funds. And in Illinois, we set it up where donors can donate to an individual school, or if it's a company, they can donate to a region. Northern Illinois region is Kendall County, King County, all the way out to the Iowa border, including Rockford. And then thank you very much for touching on ESAs and a little bit on 529s. There's been a lot of changes just recently with federal law 529s. I was just talking with a family today on how they're looking at the tax advantage because they have a 529 account that they were setting aside for college. That's now eligible to use for K through 12 education. And there's federal tax benefits and state, so they can put money into a 529, or I think they had a high school or a private school in the suburbs. They can now put that in and then take it directly out within a couple of days and then pay for schooling and then get those tax benefits through that. So those are recent federal changes that help promote school choice. All right, I've got a couple of good questions that came in here, and I don't know any specifics about Nevada, so if the person who's asking this question has more information for the speakers that they don't know. But generally, they had mentioned Nevada has a high eligibility rate, assuming for school choice. What are some statistics that you've seen on performance, and is choice in different states working?
So specifically with the Nevada program, one of the things that is interesting, unfortunate about Nevada is that it went to a Supreme Court, it went to the Nevada Supreme Court, and the Nevada program itself was upheld as constitutional, but the funding mechanism used to fund the program was struck down by the Nevada Supreme Court. And essentially what they said was is that the Nevada legislature set aside $2.1 billion to fund public schools. They said the Nevada legislature said that was sufficient to fund public schools, and none of that money could be used to go towards any form of education savings accounts. And they listed the whole things except, if they would have said, oh, there's a separate line item of that money up to $300 million gone or anything like that. So technically right now the program is not in operation, but it is on the books, and it has been more or less implemented by the Treasurer's Office. So I can kind of talk about how that would have worked, but none of those funds have flown yet, so we don't have any performance data on that particular program. But there's over 25 studies now that have looked at gold standard studies, and what that means is that essentially you have children that have applied to an oversubscribed program, and kids are picked by lottery whether they receive a voucher or whether they don't. And children that receive a voucher then go on to a private school, they go back into the public school if they want to and turn in that voucher. The kids that didn't receive a voucher can pay full freight, go to a private school, go back to the public school if they wanted to. And what that does is it eliminates sort of the differences in those children. You can match them up demographically and all those sorts of things, but it removes the parental sort of guidance and parental incentive that's involved there. The idea being that the parents that are equally motivated to provide these applications for their children, and they would move them on to a different educational environment, would be the same. They could remove those external factors for parental environment from these studies. And so what they found is that there's a slight advantage, and again, over 25 studies, they found a slight advantage for those children that have received a voucher to go to a private school. It's not a lot, I'm not going to tell you that it's a huge number, but they have found that it is a slight advantage. But the one thing I think is most interesting about this is there's a study out of Washington, D.C. that looks at the Washington, D.C. voucher program, and that's capped at about 2,000 kids roughly. The average income, if I remember this correctly, the average income of a family that receives a voucher in Washington, D.C. Is $26,000. That's their family income. So we're talking about extremely poor individuals in D.C. What they found was that the children that received a voucher attended college at 21 points higher than those that didn't receive the voucher. Now, some of those kids have gone on to private schools. This is a discussion of sort of say a private school advantage. It's people that actually received that voucher went on to go on to college at 21% points higher. I think that's a really important fact because that's one of the things that we always talk about, getting kids college and career ready, and we have good studies that look at that.
You'll find the same thing. I think if you look up Patrick Wolf. Patrick Wolf does a whole bunch of these studies and looks across all the meta studies, and then also J.P. Green at University of Arkansas. And they're probably the two people who have spent the most time doing what they can to compare apples to apples and tell you what's really going on in school choice. I mean, if you're let's say you're in Texas or Tennessee, and you don't like what's going on in your child's school, and you pull your kid out and send them to a small Christian school that's thinly funded, let's just put it that way. That kid might not, there are some public schools that outperform some private schools, just as there are vice versa. It used to be in the Chicago area where everybody said, well, the Catholic schools outperform everybody for much less money, and that's changed over the last few decades, where it's no longer the same clear advantage. But the other issue too is much more important than test scores, and that is the parental satisfaction and the parental wishes. Maybe you just want your child to feel safer. Maybe you just want your child to, not be berated for saying things that his parents talk about at the dinner table that they think, instead of going to a very large, massive institution that is, I mean, if you look at the way schools are now, I mean, half the public schools, or many of them, are on lockdown. They have security guards out front, and we know that there's reasons behind that. But maybe people just want their kids to go to a school that they like more, and they like the empowerment and the capacity to say, if I don't like what the school is doing, I can pull my kid out, and the school actually has to listen to the parent. So there's a wide variety of reasons why money following the child is a better allocation of resources than money following the district. And we should never lose sight of that, just by simply looking at test scores. The last thing I'll say about test scores is, whether it's charters or schools of choice, private schools, the college attendance is higher, particularly with charters in the city of Chicago. And a lot of these studies, that you have to really pull them apart, because you have to compare the choice schools to the schools they are replacing. And you can't take all choice schools and compare them to all public schools and then wonder why the stats don't look as good for choice when you've got New Trier, Lake Forest, whatever kind of school is in the New York suburbs and things like that. Because I think we all know that the rich people find a way, the very rich, number one, they're exercising choice by moving to a rich district, which you can't do unless you want to pony up $750,000 for a house that you can pay $25,000 a year property tax on. So you have to really step back from the stats and say, what is it that I want for my child? And that's a much better question to ask, and say, well, how does this test score compare? The more we focus on test scores, the more we kind of like miss the forest for the trees.
Thank you. Following up on the question came in about charter schools, what's the biggest challenge to existing Illinois public charter schools as far as operational success and sustaining that?
You can accuse me of having a biased opinion. Number one, I think one of the hardest things that charter schools have to go through is that they're too hard to start. What you'd rather have instead of having it where it's like you have to jump through all these hoops, and then quite frankly, what that makes you have to do is you have all the benefits that you might get from a charter school. Not having to have as much bureaucratic control, having a little bit more, the principal and the people running the school have a little bit of budgetary control, and a little bit of curriculum control and things like that. If the process is so hard to start one, then there's really not that much difference between that and an already existing district school. Now, there's always a risk. I mean, if you let in too many charters, you can get lower quality, and those charters are going to fail. And if you're too strict, then you lose some of the benefits of what you get from the dynamic nature of having all kinds of different schools. So there's a happy medium in there somewhere. But I would advocate for a looser chartering process with a faster closing process. Some schools get 5 years, some schools get 3 years, and some schools you don't worry about too much. They start, and then they're doing so well, and they're doing just fine. And you're like, okay, they're pretty good. And then others, you have to watch some of the financial shenanigans that some people have done with charters. But you show me the most egregious example of financial management at a charter, mismanagement at a charter school, and I will show you 5 or 6 things that happen in district schools all across Illinois all the time. Only with the district schools it's legal.
I don't have too much to add to that, other than I would look at Arizona as sort of a state to look for when it comes to charter policy. They have a good ability to let new charter schools enter the marketplace and serve students. They do have somewhat of a long charter process to give them time to work. But I think one of the things that we found when you tease out the data from Arizona is that some of those charters that don't work, they're actually not shut down by their chartering authority. They're actually shut down by parents themselves by pulling their kids out. And the parents are pretty brutal and swift when it comes to that. They're pretty smart when it comes to determining if those schools are meeting the needs of their kids. And they have no problems shutting those schools down by pulling their kids out. I think the number is about, they actually shut down schools 3 or 4 years faster than the state would have done themselves. So I think it's a good place to look when you're talking about charter policy.
Thank you. We'll take another question here, and I kind of failed to mention trades and certificate programs. Something in the Rockford region that our community college and many others around the state are working on is more certificate programs starting at a much younger age and trying to make that an option for younger students. But this question kind of touches on that. With public education costs so high and scores so low, should we be talking about whether or not to have compulsory education at all? And should we have more of a workforce development or opportunities for at a younger age for students to work or start work early?
I'd love answering that question. The buzzwords college and career ready are a big deal among education policy wonks. And clearly you want, the theory is you want your child to be as educated as you possibly can be, as much as you possibly can at as early of an age as possible. And there's something to be said for that, and that's kind of what prep schools do, the model prep school or the British prep school that we see in all the movies and stuff like that. But this is really an important question, and it's one of the reasons why, I grew up in Lake Forest. I don't hold it against me, I grew up on the poor side of town. But I grew up in that same mindset of education, 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 and that's what we hear, and no one's really arguing with that. The fact of the matter is that there's gazillions of jobs that don't require all kinds of book learning, and all kinds of book learning, all kinds of deep knowledge of things that you might be interested in, is literally falling out of the sky for free on the internet. And directly to that point, we need to really de-compliance the public education system. And you follow this not just in education, but in healthcare and everything. We're becoming a compliance state. Did you comply with this rule? Did you comply with that rule? And compulsory education is one of those things that my sister goes crazy when I say we should get rid of compulsory education, because in the mindset it's like, oh, if we got rid of compulsory education, then no one would get educated ever. Who thinks like that? The fact of the matter is, almost everybody wants to get some kind of education to move forward in designing their life the way they want it designed. And almost everybody would get educated, and they would choose the path to educate themselves in I would take, you could split the United States down the middle and get rid of compulsory education and go into a full private kind of school choice system west of the Mississippi and do what we're currently doing east of the Mississippi. The idea that east of the Mississippi would radically outperform west is probably wrong. That when you decontrol things, when you deregulate things, when you let people make their own choices, here's a radical thought. Most people are better at running their lives and making decisions for their lives than Donald Trump or Barack Obama. And that's what we all believe that in our heads. We're like, oh yeah, I can make decisions for my own life. But then we sit there and say, but we have to have compulsory education, and we have to send these kids to these schools that have a common core curriculum that's the same thing for everybody all the time. It's ridiculous. And when I do these things, I'm getting animated, and I'm probably getting a little bit controversial, but it's time for us to step back from that compliance nature and say, maybe I sound like a hippie from Lake Forest, but the kids will figure out a way to get an education if we let them find the best way to do that. And as I've said, I'll say it 1,000 times, maybe I'll mention it some more in another question. The opportunities to educate your child or to self-educate the way you want is literally falling out of the sky, and the cost is almost free. And yet we're thinking about maintaining this $10,000 to $12,000 a year per person, per system that isn't performing as well as it should be. Is that a good rant?
I have nothing to add, so.
All right, those were the initial questions. Are there any other questions? Yeah, do you want to yell it out and then?
Yeah, kind of going along the same line here, you're talking about this control of education, say, by going to a voucher system, don't you take the chance that the money's coming from the state, and the state now taking more control of the private schools?
There's definitely that danger, okay? I've had that debate with many, many conservative libertarian friends. And to say that it's not a problem or it'll never be a problem is to understate the issue. Where I think it's mistaken is that you're worried about the control that's going to happen to people who are currently getting a bad education or less than good education or not desired education right now, when that top-down state control is already, you're worried about what's going to happen to these 10% that are freely educated when 90% of everybody is getting that top-down compliance-based education. And I think what you're going to see is that as choice expands, here's a real simple example. Homeschoolers make up how much of the student population? About 2 to 3%, I think, is the latest thing. Ask any legislator what happens when they try to pass a law that control homeschooling. And 2% tail wags the 98% dog every time. They are scared senseless. A bill pops up, there's 500 moms with pies walking around the legislature, and that bill is dead the next day. And that's in every state that tries it. And Illinois, as bad as it is, in a lot of stuff, is one of the best homeschooling states there is. So what I think will happen with choice is that as people get more choices, any actual attempt to control them as those choices come out will get such a negative reaction that you're going to see an expansion of diversity in education that will be very, very hard to reverse.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything you just said. The price we pay for freedom is eternal vigilance. And we have to make sure that the state doesn't cross the line when it comes to regulating schools. But the one thing I do always like to point out, though, is that the state already can do whatever it wants. We've done a study not too long ago that looked at currently existing laws that impact private schools in states that don't have any sort of school choice program. And it's pretty funny to read some of the things that is already required in private schools. So they already have that power, and school choice doesn't change that dynamic. Maybe makes it a bigger target, but to Bruno's point, Nevada, I remember the homeschoolers came out to kill a bill there, and it was swiftly put out of its misery. So when you have groups coming together and like what they have, it's very difficult to change those laws. So there is a built-in mechanism in place to stop that.
So you kind of answered this question that's related in just a little bit more detail about the state program, since it's a 5-year trial program, or however you want to phrase that. So the question kind of revolves around, have any other states repealed this type of tax credit program or a voucher program in the past? And it sounds like we just have to recruit the homeschool parents and we'll be fine. They try to repeal it. But have we experienced that in any other states that you know?
So to answer specifically about the spirit of this question, no statewide program has ever been repealed before, or not renewed. So that has never happened. Colorado at Douglas County, Colorado had a voucher program just for that county. It got caught. There were 300 kids that applied. It got caught up in litigation. Went all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. What ended up happening there was that Justice Scalia passed away, and it was a 4-4 decision. We didn't get that case resolved. New school board members were elected, and they repealed that program. So, to our knowledge, that is the first school choice program that's ever been repealed. But again, it was only for a district. No statewide program has ever. There have been a couple programs that have changed from, say, a tax credit scholarship to a voucher, or from a voucher to an education savings account, and that underlying program went away. But the total number of programs didn't go down. So that's pretty much what's happening.
We have have time for one or two more questions before we wrap up. I thought I saw one other hand. All right, you want to yell it out?
It's about the SAFE program as well. So it's a scholarship program, but is it considered like the closest thing we have to a voucher? So if people put money in, do those people just get their money back, or is it the application process that it's almost like a privately funded school voucher system? How does it work?
You guys want to just touch on the difference between
Try to
vouchers?
understand.
Miles is the expert on that, and he's not here.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about, generally speaking, about difference between vouchers and tax credit scholarship programs. So vouchers are state dollars that go from the state, to the Department of Ed or whoever, to a parent. That parent signs over the check to the private school, pays for that tuition cost. Under tax credit scholarship program, companies or individuals can donate to not-for-profits, 501c3s, that are obviously federally recognized and then also recognized with the state they currently reside in, to administer these scholarship programs. Those companies and individuals receive a state tax credit for their contributions, not in Illinois, but in other states. They're also eligible to receive the federal charitable deduction. They cannot do that here in the state. And those scholarship granting organizations can then give out those scholarships to whoever is designated in the law, whether it's special needs children or low-income children or anybody. If it's resident, it can be anybody that applies. And they can give those monies out in the form of scholarships. I can't think of a state off my head, there may be one, but I can't think of any state off the top of my head. And actually most states, I know most states prohibit this, of a parent donating money to a scholarship granting organization and then a scholarship granting organization giving directly back to the parent. There is no sort of quid pro quo like that. Most states, and I would be willing to venture almost all states, prohibit that sort of thing from happening. But there are donations.
Because the argument you're hearing is that it only helps the rich, and then some states it's the poor in the rearview mirror. So is that true? No.
I mean, I have to look up the specific language from Illinois, but in my home state of Indiana, there is an income cap, which I always think is hilarious for people to say that this helps the rich. By definition, those people are not eligible for the program. Right? They cannot, you get money because they make too much. Do you know off the top of your head what the numbers are?
Yeah, in Illinois, I can't remember all the categories, but the absolute max that you can make under the tax credit program would be a family income of $75,000, and you're only eligible for a 50% reduction on tuition at that level. To qualify for 100%, it's sub 40. I mean, it's like a $30,000 family income rate to qualify for 100%. So I think that argument. It has no justification on the actual credit or the voucher, because those are almost always income, and it's relatively low income eligibility. I think the argument sometimes comes up, well, we're benefiting the rich because they can make the donation, but it'd be hard pressed, I think, to really claim that as being a huge benefit to the rich, because a company or a wealthy individual, or even just somebody who wants to donate $500, they have to actually make the donation. And they're giving away that money. They're only getting a partial credit back. They're not getting 100% credit on their money. So one way or the other, they're not receiving any financial benefit for it. They still have to write a check out. And then that money then benefits somebody under those income qualifications that would apply to a group like Empower and go through the application process and qualify based off their federal tax returns and all the other items that are required. Sure. Yeah, no problem. I think I saw one or two other, and we'll probably close it up after that. Go ahead.
What is your feeling about the current AV that governs Vino? And when will that come for a vote? And is there time for registered schools to get 500 eyes?
I'll probably jump on this one. Where's Miles, darn it? No, I don't know. I mean, from a legislative standpoint, where that's going to go. Obviously, the governor was trying to be inclusive of other schools that were starting the application process that weren't quite recognized by the state of Illinois. Personally, and many of us didn't want to have that qualification of recognition in there at all, but in the final compromise package, there's some give and take, and there were some issues there. The vast majority of schools are already recognized, so I think that was part of the process. The thinking was, well, we're at least opening the door for a lot. schools can become recognized through the course of the next year and then get into the program. So if the AV holds up, or we're able to pass some other separate legislation, more schools would be eligible if they're just starting the recognition process. So it's a moving target right now. Initially I've heard that the other side of the debate isn't going to consider it at all, and they're just going to overturn the governor's veto, and they're going to attempt to do that. So there would be no change for those schools in the process. But I think a lot of that is still being negotiated. We'll kind of see. There's some Chicago school funding elements tied to that AV, which may help. But again, it just comes down to the number of votes needed to overturn just 71. So we'll kind of see how that pans out in the legislature. All right, I thought I saw one last question, but if not, maybe it's been answered. We want to wrap it up here. I think our panelists and myself will be around to answer any additional questions. If you want to ask any more detailed questions on the state tax credit program, I can help with that. I can also direct you to a website that has some forms and information on the application process. Don't forget to take those fancy yellow scarves. It's kind of cold outside, so those are just to help celebrate National Choice Week. So those are free, and then there's also some information and promotional material on the back table. I think produced by Heartland, maybe somebody had choice, but if you want to grab those are free. And please share your thoughts with the speakers here. And can we give one big round of applause for them? Thank you so much. Have a great day.
In case you want to ask questions on the Scout program. We've been working on it since the beginning.
Yes, really? Okay. So there's donuts actually. How are you? Good. Very well, thank you. Here, yes, get started. All the forms that we put together for English, all and then like I said, I'm sorry about that. For donors, you're welcome. I'm sorry about that. They are still collecting. They have to collect these 75 million. And the program to actually start issuing out these scholarships. The reports area will be closed. And of course, the number one besides Chicago, number one national.
Yes.
We've been doing great.
We've been working hard on it.
Sorry. We're getting there. But yeah, it's a great, and like I said, it's a button just on the right hand right now. You'll see it. No problem. Bye, you guys. Have a good day. Sorry.
Just the only spot where the garbage are. It's not the most ideal location. Not really. I wonder if she's grabbing a new bit.
I was thinking the same thing, but I forgot to do it this which way.
And I was like, oh, we'll just stick it over here. There you go.
Such a good idea.
In addition to
So it is.
that's what
She's got something still. Oh, okay. Hard for safety. Okay. We'll be back.
Thank you very much. You bet. You bet.
They're on the verge. They don't get the blue.
No, Roundhouse is all set.
I'm meeting you too. I've got a cold, so I can give you a elbow.
Yeah, I would also say, and that's what, so you can say that within 10 years, almost every industrial state, and now well, they have TV stations, so, but it's both. So my attitude is, I'd like to see a system for charge. I've asked for it.
Nice to meet you.
So, as a libertarian, I'm asking myself, yeah, no, I read that article.
Knowingly, I know myself in enough trouble unknowingly.
Thanks for coming. Cut short out, thanks so much. Very good. Very good.